Now you see why black people don't trust the police. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about when they first started, right? So let's start with the civil rights movement. So this movement gained significant momentum, I want to say, in like the 1950s, but really it was post World War II. All right. So when after all the soldiers came home, and after and after coming through this horrible like things that they've seen over there that I mean I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. So through the roots, it was traced back to earlier resistance to racial segregation and discrimination before the war. Major events like the Montgomery bus boycott, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and then the March on Washington, 1963, highlighted the movement. The primary goal, though, was to end and institutionalize racism, segregation, discrimination, and disenfranchisement, especially in southern United States. The key objectives included voting rights, desegregation of schools and public spaces, and equal employment opportunities. Now, fast forward 50 years later, we got Black Lives Matter, which started in 2013, but really it started after the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the killing of Trayvon Martin. It emerged as a response to systematic violence against Black people, particularly police brutality. And of course, there's arguments both ways, but we'll get into that in a bit. So the movement arose to combat police brutality and broader systematic racism. It sought to challenge the ongoing disparities in the criminal justice system, as well as issues like mass incarceration, racial profiling, and the militarization of law enforcement. Now, some of these things are actually true. Now, it's not broad across the country, but in certain areas, yes, these things were true and there were issues. So we're not going to sit back and say, oh no, just get a job and strap up by your bootstraps and just don't get in trouble. Like, no, these things happened to me. I've been pulled over 21 times in my life. Like, so I can't. Yeah, yes, you did. You did, unfortunately. But but let's go. So let's move to the
That's
second
that's an
section.
inside joke for
Yes,
everybody.
we'll explain it at
Sorry.
some point,
Someday you'll all find out.
someday.
Just remember, I'm not racist. I like my coffee black.
Yes,
It's been up there since you started the segment.
racist. Right. So first
This is
thing
how
is
we do. This is
it
how we do
is.
it.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over the timeline as far, and this is back from the Library of Congress. All right, so it states here that the civil rights movement was between 1945 and 1968. I'm not going to read all of this, but we'll pinpoint some of the key features of this movement. So it says in the middle of the 20th century, nationwide movement for equal rights of African Americans, all for an end racial segregation and exclusion arose across the United States. This movement took many forms, and its participants used a wide range of means to make their demands felt, including sit ins, boycotts, protests, marches, freedom rides, and lobbying government officials for legislative action. They faced opposition on many fronts and fell victim to bombings and beatings, arrests, and assassination. By the end of the 1960s, the civil rights movement had brought about dramatic changes in the law and public practice that have secured legal protection of rights and freedoms for African Americans that would shape American life for decades to come. So let's talk about a couple of these. So the first one here is Board versus the Brown of Education. No, Brown versus Board. See, my dyslexia is showing. um, Brown versus Board of Education, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, Legal Defense and Education Fund, led by Thurgood Marshall, spent decades of fighting against racial segregation in education. This long campaign culminated when the U.S. Supreme Court Heard Brown versus Board of Education, which gathered together 5 separate cases related to school segregation and Marshall, leading the arguments before the court. On May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal.
You mean to say the Constitution that was written back during slavery actually was the thing that they used to correct the racist?
The racist. Exactly.
Oh, imagine that. We had progress. This sounds like progress to me. We're good.
Definitely does. Now next we're going to talk about Emmett Till, but there's something coming up in the woodworks because if those of you who don't know Emmett Till, he was the 14-year-old kid. I guess was accused of catcalling a white woman, and their family and friends of this woman came to this house because he was visiting from Chicago. Came to his house, pulled him out, did all kinds of horrible stuff to him, desecrated his body, and then before shooting him and killing him, leaving him in the water or in a lake. Them finding him a couple days later. But we'll get into that story in a second. Then, of course, we got the infamous Rosa Parks. I hope she called shotgun. All right, so we all know about the infamous Rosa Parks incident in Montgomery, Alabama, in which she refused to get off of a bus to give the seat to a white person. You know how it goes. All right, the Little Rock school interrogation in 1957. This was after the Brown versus Board Supreme Court decision. The state and local officials in a number of states resisted school integration, which shows you that there are states that are willing to do this against the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so all those people that say that, oh no, the states would never do that, rookies. All right, so
the whole Civil
September
War,
1957. Yeah, you're right.
No!
9 African American students attempted to attend Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. The governor ordered the state's National Guard to surround the high school, and the black students were harassed and kept from entering the building. Then you have the Birmingham campaign.
There is one thing, though, about that. You know, there is an argument to be made against forcing people into spaces together that don't get along. It's one thing to say you're not allowed to discriminate against people and you have to allow them in. It's another thing to enforce it in a way with the military. It's like, I don't know, it's just one of those ugly situations. Maybe it's that it was necessary, put the guard out. You're going to surround a school with guns. Like today, surrounding a school with guns would look a little sketchy. Unless you're actually trying to get the shooter inside the school these days. Like, then again, Uvalde. But that's a whole other thing. However, you know, there is something to be said about taking people from different neighborhoods here and there and enforce it, like making people exist with each other when they don't necessarily get along. There has to be an organic amount. There has to be some force where you're like, hey, we're going to punish people that go out of their way to dissuade people from using the same spaces. But at the same time, there has to be, it's something about the forcing of it doesn't actually help, is what I'm trying to get at, you know?
Right. It could cause further tensions.
Right.
Essentially. Right. And especially back then, you know, nowadays it's be a little bit harder because you got the internet and cell phones with cameras and stuff like that.
We've mostly gotten over a lot of this stuff other than in the second part of this segment when we talk about BLM. We've gotten over this, most of the things in the civil rights era, and I'll let you continue. We pretty much, okay, they got worked out. However they did, you know.
Exactly. You know, because then you got the Birmingham campaign, 1963, Million Man March the same year. Then, of course, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This was after Kennedy's assassination. And then the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Now, who was it that was responsible for the vote for the Civil Rights Act in 1964? Republican, Democrat, which one? If I remember correctly, it was LBJ, right?
Lyndon B. Johnson, yep.
It was LBJ. Okay, well, before LBJ, there was a filibuster when the Republicans first introduced it. It's the longest filibuster in American history, 24-hour filibuster. I don't remember the guy's name. He was a Democrat. So The Democrats did not want the Republicans to get to put the badge on their shirt.
Mm.
They blackballed them, no pun intended, and all the way until eventually they were the ones that got a hold of the Civil Rights Act and were able to craft it the way they wanted it. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't have been passed. I'm just saying they played dirty pool to get there.
Pretty much. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the timeline of the Black Lives Matter. Again, I'm not going to read all of these, but I'm just going to pinpoint a couple. So most people say it started in 2013. I think it started before then, and it started with the death of Trayvon Martin. All right. So then you've got this was on February 26th of 2012. Then in later that year, in July 13th, George Zimmerman was acquitted. You know, so this same day was the first hashtag of Black Lives Matter was posted on Twitter.
Wow. Was that the official organization BLM that was headed by the Marxist lady?
I believe so. Let me see. I think it's here. Calls for the arrest.
Because I don't know the full timeline of like the founding people necessarily. All I remember is up to the Patrice Colors.
Yeah, right here. Yeah. There it is. Patrice Colors reposts a message about the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the murder of Trayvon Martin with the hashtag Black Lives Matter right there.
7/14/23. Yep.
Mm-hmm. That's it. So I think this is where the sentiment of Black Lives Matter started. The movement started in the next year. Because now if you look at some of the other things that had happened, you had the death of Eric Garner in 2014. Then it was ruled a homicide. You had Michael Brown's death. That was, there was controversy surrounding that entire case out in Ferguson, Missouri. They had to call in a state of emergency a week after his death. Then you had Tamir Rice, which was the 12-year-old kid who was shot by police because he had a toy gun.
I think that was the Cleveland kid, right?
Yep.
He when not that long ago, there was some posts made by his mom and other family members that were disparaging of the BLM organization because they came into town and did what they did, which is hoop up, a bunch of people, and they do their march and all the stuff and whatever comes with it, and they collect a bunch of donation money. Tamir Rice's family didn't see any of that. None. Zero. They never helped anybody. Any one of these people, they were a political, poster corpse or child or both.
They're just sad. So then in 2015, you had the Black State of the Union address, which I'm sorry, I did not watch. I didn't even know existed until last week. Like, is that bad? Is that like, I don't know what I was doing. What was I doing in 2015?
I wish I had the soundbite of Joe Biden saying, "If you don't vote for me, you ain't black right now."
You ain't black. Yep. And then, then of course, the start of football season, you remember we had Colin Kaepernick in 2016, kneel during the national anthem. And then things were kind of silent in between then. They were a little silent all the way up until 2020, where, of course, we had Ahmaud Arbery's death. All right.
Dude, did you watch that trial?
I watched like the last 2 days of that trial, but I pretty much went online and kind of filled in the gaps myself. But I heard that it was
rough because there was nobody innocent. It's hard when you watch a trial where Ahmaud Arbery and the guys who ended up being the ones that caused his death, both of them went. He shouldn't have been where he was, number one, and number two, they should not have gone and mounted up in a truck with a shotgun. Both were wrong. But when you watch it and how it played out, and then you get to see how defense and the prosecution get to pick and choose what kind of evidence they want to bring in, and then they want to go behind the backs of the other, and It was gross. The prosecution, which is it basically in Ahmaud Arbery's favor, did some really nasty stuff, and the defense was like, "Look, you guys want to go down this route? You want to go down this evidence route? We already decided in hearings and when we did discovery that this particular line of questioning and evidence was inadmissible because you didn't, but we agreed you don't get if this is inadmissible, you don't get to ask a certain kind of question because that opens the door to this conversation, and we have this evidence." And that stuff kept happening over and over, and it almost tainted the jury because that's what they want to do. They want to get it in front of the jury, even if the judge throws it out. But that happens too much. That case almost got completely thrown out multiple times. But because we're in the political era that we are and everything, a lot of these judges over these cases just let it go, let it go, let it go. I don't think those guys meant to kill him, honestly. I think they meant to go and scare him. But what are you gonna do when you're a dude running in the street and you've got 3 good old boys in a pickup truck and there's a gun involved? You're gonna freak out.
Right.
Things are gonna happen. You're gonna get in a scuffle. I don't think those guys meant to kill him, but in the process, that's what happened. And nobody was in the right up until that point, And I think Ahmaud Arbery had every right to be in fear for his life. Honestly, I don't think those guys maybe should have got the sentence they did, but because a life was lost in the process, that's how it went,
Exactly. And it's funny because when we talk about gun safety, one of the main things they talk about is, you never pull a gun unless you intend to use it.
Right. It's not an intimidation tool. It's a solution to a problem, and that you use it. If you see my weapon, it's either at the range on the table going down range, or if I'm not at the range and you see it, you better hit the deck and get out of the way because there's something is probably, and I'm not starting the fight. I'm finishing it. That's how firearms work in my world.
Yep, exactly.
So, but that was rough. So I recommend if you have the time, that's a case study to go watch and listen to that, and then also go watch the Rittenhouse trial stuff too. That was a big eye opener.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of buffoonery in that trial as well.
And that's in the middle of this BLM stuff, too.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. And then we're going to finish off with, Breonna Taylor's death and no-knock warrants and things like that. And then, of course, there is George Floyd's death as well.
And, yeah, the Breonna Taylor one's kind of a rough one because you have again you have a case where police acted out of line. There was way more force than they needed to use for going into that, in there. That guy, her boyfriend, I think they let him off. They never charged him at all because what are you going to do? I don't care if you're a criminal or not. And from what I understand, Breonna and her boyfriend were involved in some drug stuff, and that's why she got fired from being an EMT. And she was on EMS crew at one point. And that's one thing. That can be true. The other thing that can be true is 2 plainclothes officers standing in your living room in the middle of the night. I'm shooting too. I'm sorry. I'm shooting too. If I find a couple people in my living room and I feel threatened, I have my family at night asleep. I may use force because I don't know your intention. You're in my house in the middle of the night. Pre-dawn raid. I don't care if you knock or not. It might take me a while to get out of bed, but I'm not going to come to the front door without something in my hand, just in case. It's not going to be pretty. I don't care who you are, if you're a criminal or not. These police have to figure out their policies and how they do things. They watch these people. They follow them to work, to the grocery store, everywhere. You're telling me you can't pick this guy up on the way to go get milk? You can't grab him when he's going to pick up a cart at the smoke shop? You can't grab her when she's on her way somewhere. They claim they tracked them moving drugs and packages all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
See, we're talking about BLM, a movement that I do not agree with as an organization and their tactics. And yet I find myself agreeing with them, at least in this, that the police were in the wrong. Some of those cops did get in trouble for that. They were out of line. But the problem I had with BLM is they want to turn everybody into a martyr. They're not martyrs for nothing. Maybe the boyfriend who, like any guy would, defend your
Hmm.
home in the middle of the night, fine. See, but they don't have a middle ground. You're either all in with them or you're all out. There's no
Hmm.
jury of your peers
Yeah, because
stuff.
multiple things can be true at
None of that.
once.
Yeah.
Not everybody here. I mean, we talk about George Floyd, and what he did some serious time for was actually very egregious. But again, you don't use somebody's past to dictate what's going on in the future. Did he do something wrong in this situation? Do we even still know if he had a fake $20 bill?
Look, that's what's in the reports about it, I guess. But the thing about Floyd was that he was known to have drugs on him all the time.
Hmm.
He was a known addict, and his roommates knew. If you go to Daily Wire and you watch the BLM thing that Candace Owens did about George Floyd, she goes and talks to his roommates. The roommates say the same thing that Tamir Rice's mom said. Nobody came to the house. No one showed us any love. No one paid our bills for any amount of time. George never brought his stuff into our house. We knew he had problems, but he never brought his drama home. And when he lost his life, his family didn't even show up to collect his stuff. That's the sad part.
Hmm. And his
That's the
daughter.
sad part. That makes me feel I get a little bit emotional when I hear that. It's like you telling me this guy you went on TV and cried tears over. You didn't have the decency to go talk to his roommates and collect his things and put his life to the rest of his things in order, his affairs in order, or all of that. No, you want to stand on TV and grandstand.
Yeah, just like all the rest of them. And again, like we said, it's not about not about the sentiment. We understand the sentiment, but you know, the organization. This is the whole reason why Candace Owens did this entire investigative report on it. But yeah, so to get into those, we had 5 sections here. We're probably going to skip over this next one because we've already talked about most of that stuff. Uh, Key influences in external groups. We had the Black Panthers, of course. They engaged in advocating for self-defense and more radical solutions towards police officers and stuff that were against them. You got Antifa, which is in the modern BLM era. Not directly a part of BLM, but Antifa was loosely affiliated with the group and appeared at many protests. So these were the catalysts of a lot of the riots and stuff that happened. And then you've got, of course, the KKK back in the day. Um, there are people that are saying that they allowed the KKK even allowed them to have their space and allowed them to have their stuff, but it's still the KKK. So you can't. There's not really a middle ground. It's.
No, the closest you get to the middle ground on the KKK is during Civil War era. The guy that was really one of the most prominent people, who I believe was a general or a commander or some kind of, he was a military guy in the Confederacy. He disbanded it. He said he nationally called for the disbanding of the KKK for what it had become. It tells you a lot about an organization that when somebody who's like at the top, I think he was like their grand wizard or whatever, decided no, nope, and you walked away from it, and then it became like a glove for other people to walk into and use as a cudgel, or as some of us like to call like the Patriot Front guys now. It's like feds.
Oh yeah,
The 9 people that showed up to support to do their KKK rally in Dayton a few years back. And like for 3 weeks, you heard
remember
about
that.
there's a KKK coming from Indiana. Oh no! $68,000 in security funds later, 9 guys show up.
That's crazy. I remember that. I was laughing my ass off. But let's move to the. Then you have the Democratic South and the Republican South. So the Democratic South, in the Civil Rights era, they were known as Dixiecrats, largely opposed desegregation civil rights laws. Figures like Strom Thurmond, you were talking about, uh, who had the filibuster against the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And then now you have the Republican South, um, which become a Republican stronghold with conservative leaders criticizing Black Lives Matter. Lawmakers in the region have focused on supporting law enforcement, passing legislation to curb protests, and reinforcing policies that critics argue exacerbate racial inequalities. Um, Again, this doesn't seem like there's a middle ground. While both movements share common ground in seeking radical justice, the civil rights movement fought against legal segregation and blatant disenfranchisement, while Black Lives Matter focused more on modern forms of racial inequality, particularly with the criminal justice system. Um, there's no lies detected. I mean, there was an issue, but it's not just with African Americans. I mean, you had Spanish Americans, you had poor whites. There's a lot of people that fall victim to that system, but it's not always where you think it is. You think that in the South that this is happening all the time. Not necessarily. Like, it's happening all over the place, just in small spurts, just like I mentioned earlier. Um, but yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to basically the prominent headlines that made these movements go. So remember, we were talking about Emmett Till earlier. So Emmett Till is let's see, he was born in Chicago, Illinois, died August 28th, 1955. African American teenager whose murder catalyzed the emerging civil rights movement. This is where I think the civil rights movement blew up because when this happened, not every I mean, there wasn't national news back then, so it was in a very small town. Not many people knew about it except for maybe the surrounding communities. So what Emmett Till's mother decided to do was she decided to give a call to Jet Magazine, and basically went Jet Magazine went to the funeral, and she decided she wanted to have an open casket.
Mm.
Now, his body was decomposing over days in a river. So they decided right off the bat, they were like, no, I don't I want the entire country to see what they did to my son. And if you've seen some of the photos, here, let me see if I can find one. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of direct photos, but
See, Time has an article here that when it says the photo that changed the civil rights movement.
oh wait, no, not that. Whoops, that's a YouTube video.
Ooh.
Let me see. I'm going to go into images because I want at least people to understand. So let's move you to open. Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna make a disclaimer here before we show this. It's ugly. It's very ugly. So I'm going to wait about 10 seconds for the feeds to catch up or whatnot. But yeah, what they did to him was pretty ugly. So I'm going to go ahead and show it. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. So this was at the after they had found his body and at the funeral, I believe, with his mother and father. So here, let me get out of that. So it was pretty damaging to the South once they had seen that. I mean, there were other things that happened too. What happened uh, in Montgomery of crossing the bridge that was caught on camera. People started seeing these things happen time and time again. But what I talked about earlier was that history repeats itself. Or doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes. So let's move over to Trayvon Martin. All right, so fatal shooting of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman in Sanford exposed deep divisions among Americans on race issues. Martin, 17-year-old African American, was returning from a convenience store when he was noticed by Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer. Zimmerman contacted the non emergency line of the Sanford Police Department, mentioned that there had been burglaries in the neighborhood, and told dispatcher that he had observed a real suspicious guy who was walking around looking about. Zimmerman also described Martin as someone up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. Um, so if you look at kind of both of these cases are the ones that I think um, tugged on the emotional strings of all Americans, because it's a child or it's a teenager, someone who's young, someone who doesn't even have the right to vote yet, probably didn't have their first girlfriend, whatnot, whatever you want to mention. Um, but I think the difference here is that we don't have much about Emmett Till, but we do know that before the woman that accused him of this, before she died, finally came clean with the story and stated that like he never did any of those things. So all the way up until 50, 60 years later, we didn't know. As far as Trayvon Martin is concerned, a lot of people were talking about his background and about like, oh, he smoked weed or did all this other stuff. How many kids smoke weed? Like, it's just, oh, I had a beer when I was 17. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's the it's it. Kids do dumb things. Adults do dumb things. You know, so
Right. Now, so both were teens, both were shot by assailants, both assailants were acquitted, and both movements were exacerbated because of these events. So that's kind of like the tie between it rhyming, because they weren't exactly the same, but
well,
they were
what
treated
made
the
them
same.
not? What made them not like line up? What was the key difference in these two stories
I think one was more direct, the other was more indirect.
where they targeted Till? Till was directly targeted,
Till was directly targeted. They went to his house and pulled him out.
right? Whereas Zimmer's story was there had been break-ins and burglaries, and so he went for a walk with his firearm and got in a fight.
He
Now
got his
let's not.
ass kicked.
He did. He
He
got
got his ass
whooped.
kicked. Like,
So let's not kid ourselves. Just because it's a teenager does not mean they do not have. Have you seen the kids on Friday nights at the high school? If you ever that would put the pads on, I was in the marching band. I know. All right. My 20 years is coming up, and I'm about to be in the alumni reunion band in a week or so. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, these kids, they're they can be athletic. They can be strong. They have their adult functional bodies with mostly child brains. Sometimes they call it manish. They're not quite a man. They're
man
almost
child.
man. Man child. Better than being a
Yeah.
manlet. But Zimmer got whooped. That's why they ruled in his favor. He was in fear. He had the bodily injuries to show, beyond reasonable doubt. This guy was in fear for his life. He had, reasonable. He was allowed to use his use force. Now he took a risk. Anytime you step out of your house with a firearm, you take a risk, especially when you know that you could be in a confrontation. He didn't know who was out there breaking into stuff necessarily. I mean, it could have been this kid. I don't know the full details of all the other things, but yeah, he definitely got in that fight and was not winning. So that's a key difference. However, the outcome, like we're saying, the thing that rhymes with the civil rights movement of yesteryear is the fact that this was a young guy that lost his life in the end. So, and Zimmer was actually Hispanic, wasn't even a white guy. They tried to make him out to be a white guy.
I was a Hispanic at the last name of Zimmerman.
I I don't know.
That that's like Zing Hail of all Spanish names. I don't know. But anyways, let's move on to this next one, because this story, everybody remembers Rodney King. Okay, we know what happened. We know what he did. What, believe it or not, what he did was wrong, but what the cops did was like just as bad to him.
You can
But
have a mob with authority, and you can have a mob that's out to just do, like it's no different. Like you get a bunch of guys together that get into that mindset, they're and they get out of hand. It's no different than an angry mob in a riot. They just have
exactly.
the riot shields. It's like it's the mob with the riot shields and the billy clubs. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's wrong.
Yeah. So this girl, this is the story that we saw right before the show started, of Latasha Harlins, who had went into a convenience store and was accused of stealing something. So the owner acted out in self defense, or at least that's what she thought it was, and they ended up getting into altercation. And as she's walking away, shoots her in the back of the head, not once but twice.
Oh yeah, and the altercation at the counter, the lady reaches over and grabs her by the arm
Mm-hmm.
and start like you when you watch the security the CCTV footage,
Mm-hmm.
it's obvious. It's obvious who the assailant is here, and it was definitely the store owner, the wife of the store owner, the lady running the place. I don't understand it. It's totally out of line.
Yeah. She was sentenced to 10 years in state prison, but it was suspended, and she was placed on 5 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a payment of $500 in restitution. So her life was worth $500. Oh, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it says it here, but she also had to pay for their funeral expenses.
I'm sorry. Let me clean up the mess for you.
Right. So you can wonder why, like, everybody says it was Rodney King that started the LA riots. No, this here, if you guys would have seen, like, they stormed the courtroom, like
Didn't they?
they were going for the judge's head
Wasn't
because of
there
this.
something about somebody's home getting burned down, or the store or
Yeah,
something?
yeah. So her store got burnt down, but then it just start. There was just nothing but lawlessness, because at that point, if you treat people like monkeys, no pun intended. I said it, not you, Skrapp. So
Better
he's
he
like, not me.
than me.
But, like, what do you expect? Because now they feel like, okay, well, we're only worth $500, so let's show them what $500 really looks like. And then $10 billion later in damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm going to compare this situation with the George Floyd situation. All right. So I got a little video to show you guys.
It's just after 8 p.m. on May 25th, and the security cameras of this local restaurant are rolling. The indicated time is about 20 minutes past. A blue Mercedes has been parked curbside on East 38th Street for several minutes. We do not have footage showing when it arrived. George Floyd is in the driver's seat. A police car pulls up in front of this local convenience store, and two officers walk in. Minneapolis police said in a statement their officers responded to a report of a forgery in progress, meaning someone was trying to use counterfeit money in a store. A few minutes later, the officers crossed the street and approached the vehicle. The police said they found the suspect in his car. The first officer approaches the driver while his partner walks around to the passenger side. The interaction between the officer and Floyd can't clearly be seen from this angle, but the driver of this black vehicle filmed part of it on his phone. The officer struggles to get Floyd out of the car. His colleague walks over to help him put the handcuffs on. The black car pulls away and drives off after a few minutes. Floyd falls briefly to the ground. The officer lifts him back up before leading him towards the sidewalk, where he directs Floyd to sit on the ground. A park police car shows up to the scene. Redacted body cam footage from that new officer was released by the park police chief. The officer exits the car to see his two colleagues questioning Floyd and two people who were just in the car. A few minutes later, the officer helps Floyd up off the ground. The video has no sound, so we don't know what was said between the two officers and Floyd in this moment. They walk him across the street back towards their squad car. Floyd falls to the ground once more. Police originally said they noticed Floyd going into medical distress and called an ambulance to the scene. Another police car pulls up, obstructing our view from this angle and making it hard to clearly see what unfolded in the next 4 minutes between the officers and Floyd. We do see Officer Chauvin pull up to the scene with his colleague, and behind the vehicle's open door, we can make out what seems to be a struggle. Whatever was happening between Floyd and the officers at that very moment caught the attention of this passerby who stops to watch. 2 minutes later, a witness standing on Chicago Avenue captures part of the scene unfolding behind the squad car. One officer looks over as 3 of his colleagues restrain Floyd, who is lying face down.
So they
Really?
call
Three
for
guys? 3 guys
trying to restrain him.
that's already in custody? He
Drugs
doesn't have
are,
the use of his arms.
drugs are a hell of a thing.
I guess so.
So I had not only so I have some medical background and also my family. So my mom worked ER. Okay. Friday night, full moons, that kind of stuff. And if anybody's superstitious, I'm not, but there was definitely a rhythm to the madness that happened in ERs. She watched a guy kick the back window out of a cop cruiser one night.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. It's in the police report. If anybody doubts me, I'll go find it somehow. Like, it has to exist somewhere.
Somewhere, right?
Dude, okay. And let's just say it was in the early 90s, so maybe the cop cars weren't made as well as they are now. So let's give it a little bit of reasonableness. Drugs are wild. You do not feel or care when you're under the influence of certain things. And we don't know what all cocktail things that Floyd happened to be on. He was a known user and abuser, and like Chris said earlier, his roommates corroborated he had some problems, and they were talking about drugs. He just didn't bring his drugs home. Yeah, you had 3 guys trying to, and he's not a small dude.
No, not
He's
at all.
not a small dude. But they perceived him having medical distress, and they stopped. They could have kept rolling and just said, "Well, we're driving you." No, their protocol is stop and assess the medical needs of whoever it is you have in custody. Call an ambulance. They're trained in first aid and all those things, but the drugs are weird, and so they get into this altercation when they're trying to get him out of the car and on the ground and assess him. You can't assess the medical. The cop cars are meant to. They're like a small cage. You're not supposed to be able to move and be, comfortable. So he wanted to be out on the ground. He wanted to be out, so they complied with him.
There it is. All right, let's finish it up.
On the ground in handcuffs. We don't know how Floyd ended up on the ground. One officer is pressing his knee into Floyd's neck, which we see clearly in this video, taken only seconds later by another witness standing in front of the grocery store.
Officer Donut
She captured
wasn't
the
in
next
way.
10 minutes of his deadly arrest, up until he is taken away in an ambulance.
Could you see the knee clearly with the big guy in
Oh,
front?
hold on. I'm gonna pull it back up. Right there.
No. Where?
Are you talking about
Oh,
the knee?
there it is. He moves.
Yep.
Okay, it's in that last frame. Okay. That's not a neck. It looks like a shoulder. Anyway, this, when they're on these certain, I think he had fentanyl in his system is what the one coroner report was. It suppresses your breathing. You have a hard time breathing when you're in distress, and especially when you're being restrained by officers. It works your body. It's these cops don't know. This is information the cops have no idea. They have no idea how much is in his system, what his vital signs are, none of that. All they know is, okay, guy's in medical distress, and then they go open the door, and then he's kicking at him and everything, and then they have to restrain him again, and it's sad. It's very sad. And then nobody wanted this end.
Yeah. So to compare and contrast these two, so they both died at a convenience store, or at least around a convenience store. They both died in broad daylight. Then the One died immediately and one died right after. The store owner wasn't necessarily acquitted. They were actually both convicted, but she definitely served a completely different sentence than Eric Chauvin.
Wait, the store owner for calling in the are you talking about the store the other
The
case?
other store
Okay.
owner, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There were two store owners in both
Miss
stories, just one of them was unrelated to the actual death. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they both were convicted, but her sentence was reduced to merely 400 hours of community service, $500 fine, and funeral costs. Which is, I'm sorry, that is absolutely outrageous. And the fact that people really don't know about that story shows how the media portrays a bunch of information, because when you look back at the riots, that's what sparked it, not the Rodney King situation.
Right. And it wasn't even necessarily the girl's death that sparked the thing. It was the fact that the
cops,
the murderer, decided that she was not, that the system decided that they were not going to prosecute and put her away for murder. Like, it's like they just let her off. You killed a person shooting them in the back on the way out of your establishment, and you're just gonna let them off with a slap.
Exactly.
Braden says something here. The problem is kneeling on him while he's cuffed. He doesn't seem to be resisting because DC had his hands on his hips, not bracing himself or flowed. Yeah, Derek Chauvin.
Derek Chauvin. I said Eric. His name's Derek. You're right.
Yeah.
Good correction on that one.
Yeah, I can get with that. I think if Braden, if you've got some background in policing or whatever, give us a thumb or whatever in the comments on that. I'd like to know more of what how that's being where the comment comes from on the background. Because because I've heard some cops say that, and that's when you put it that way, then yeah.
Exactly.
I could see how you could come to that conclusion if you're in law enforcement. So I want to at least acknowledge that.
Yeah, but you see but now you see kind of like the difference in justice between the two, and they were 30 years apart.
CO, corrections officer. Cool. Yeah.
Okay, so you understand.
Yeah.
And then, but I also believe that that both of these are what started the riots as well. So that's kind of like the thing that kind of ties those two together, is that they both started massive riots across the country, and more importantly in Los Angeles back then, but here it was across the country because everybody felt like, all right, we've seen enough of this. We're going to just start destroying some stuff just because of it, which I don't condone, obviously, because there are a lot of innocent people at stake in LA and also across the country during the Summer of Love. But now we're going to get into the final part of this segment. And these are two people that I thought of last week, but I could never try to figure out how to pin these two together. And that is Breonna Taylor and Fred Hampton. All right. So first thing is first, let's go ahead and check out the part with Breonna Taylor.
Now to the Breonna Taylor case, and tonight we're seeing new body camera footage of the chilling moments after Taylor was shot dead by police officers in her home last March. This was after her boyfriend Kenneth Walker fired a shot which police say injured one of those officers. The officers have said that they announced themselves before breaking into the home, but Walker disputes that, saying that he thought they were intruders. Take a look at what happened next. Here's ABC's Alex Perez.
Walk straight back, or I'll send this dog on you. Walk back to my boy. Walk back, or I'll send this dog. Walk back to me. Keep on walking. Walk down. Walk. Make your hands in the air. Get down on your knees.
Dramatic body cam footage released by the Louisville Metro Police Department shows Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, moments after her death.
What did I do? Who else in the apartment? Nobody. My girlfriend's dead. Tell them we have 11015. What? How's your girlfriend? I don't know. Inside? Yeah, somebody. I was banging at the door and she said, "Who is it?" And they just started shooting. No, we down 3 times. Police search warrant. Somebody in my dad? Yeah, my girlfriend. Who was shooting at us? It was her house. Who was shooting it up? We have to go in if there's somebody. What is this about? We don't. SWAT can come. We're both just regular workers. Hey, boss. Where is she at in the apartment? She's on the ground. Where at? In the hallway. What kind of gun did she shoot? It's a 9. It's a regular 9mm. Did she shoot or you shoot it? It was her. You're scared. Spin it out.
Yeah, I thought it was him that shot, but it was.
That's
her.
what I thought.
We're gonna let SWAT. We're not fell on the ground. It was right here. Put him in a car. Yeah, let's go put him in a patrol car. You got him? I got him. I'll walk him.
So that explains his demeanor here.
We gotta get him in the car. What is this about?
Yeah, so obviously tragic, but the one thing I want to talk about here is warrants and no-knock warrants. Okay. So
even a knocking warrant at pre-dawn.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, you know.
Well, I guess it also depends on what state you're in, because different states have different like rules of engagement. But the real question is, which I think they haven't figured out, is who shot first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who shot first? Why is it that she's dead? Why is it that, you know, there's an officer that was shot? Like, who shot first? And I think that's the biggest issue here, is we don't know. Regardless, this is the hard part about warrants. You know, you were talking about why can't you just pick these people up, you know, while they're going to the grocery store, or while they're going to you know, to pick up their clothes, or going out to McDonald's or something like that. You know, like, why can't you just get them when you can surround them, you can put them in a position where they can't.
Right.
You know,
they're not. There's other bystanders. There's people watching. Put them in a position where they have to make face instead of, you know, resist.
Exactly.
And I think our buddy Vashnik, he's actually close to that area. You know, and here's the other thing. Especially if you're busting into places where there's drugs or wherever, how likely is it that maybe Brianna, if she was involved in drug ring and her boyfriend, how likely do you think they might have thought that it was some gangbangers that decided they weren't going to come in and collect a debt?
Exactly.
Well, I don't know. I'm just postulating. I'm speculating a little bit. Like, that's a possibility. I mean, I live in a town where there's stories that go around. There's drug busts, but there's also drug deals that go bad in our town. I mean, not everything in Midwest Ohio is exploding houses because there's meth labs in the basement. Sometimes doors get kicked in, not by cops. You know,
right?
So, you know, that's the thing. He's there all distraught like that, and that just makes total sense as to his demeanor in that. I completely forgot or didn't catch that she was the one that was shooting.
Right. And it says here in CNN, the charges mark the first federal counts levied against any of the officers, including the botched March 2020 raid. In addition, civil rights offenses, federal authorities charged the four with unlawful conspiracy, unconstitutional use of force, and obstruction, Garland said. Former Detective Joshua Janes, 40, Detective Kelly Goodlett, and Sergeant Kyle Meany, 35, were charged with submitting a false affidavit to search Taylor's home ahead of the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department's raid, and then working together to create a false cover story in an attempt to escape responsibility for the roles, preparing for the warrant affidavit, and contained false information. Now, this is CNN, so I take that with a grain of salt, but so this is what set up this whole thing about excessive force and about warrants and things like that, which is the reason why I brought Fred Hampton into this situation, because not a lot of people know about Fred Hampton either. And I figured that this would be the perfect opportunity to kind of show some similarities and differences between back then and now, to show that it's not all that different, right? So the 1969 raid that killed Black Panther leader Fred Hampton, details around the 1969 police shooting of Hampton and other Black Panther members took decades to come to light. This is the other issue, is that it took so long for this information to come out, that because all they knew was that, hey, we took out the head of the Black Panthers, but they didn't tell you how. So let's get into that. So early pre-dawn hours of December 4th, 1969, People's Gas truck pulled up in front of the apartment building at 2337 West Monroe Street in the west side of Chicago. 14 plainclothes Chicago police officers quietly filled out an undercover truck armed with pistols and a shotgun and machine gun, and detailed a map of their target, an apartment occupied by leaders of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. The map clearly identified the bedroom of Fred Hampton, the 21-year-old chairman of the Chicago Black Panthers, who was asleep beside his 8-month pregnant fiancee at 4:30 a.m. The police kicked down the front door and started shooting. Ballistic reports later showed that they fired more than 90 times, including machine gun rounds through the exterior walls and windows. When the volley of bullets finally stopped, 4 of the young Black Panthers inside the apartment lay shot and critically wounded, and 2 had been killed. The first was Mark Clark, who reached for his own shotgun before taking a bullet through the heart. Second was Fred Hampton, gunned down in his bed. The police were acting under orders of Edward Hanneran, the Cook County state attorney, who held a press conference claiming that his officers were surprise attacked by the Black Panthers as the police tried to execute a search warrant for illegal weapons in the apartment. Quote, the immediate violent criminal reaction to the occupants and shooting at announced police officers emphasizes extreme viciousness of the Black Panther Party. Well, it didn't take long for Hanneran's account to fall apart. It took more than a decade for the whole disturbing truth to come to light. Not only was the killing of Hampton and Clark a cold-blooded assassination of 2 militant Black activists, but documents later revealed that it was coordinated by the FBI as part of a secret program to neutralize and destroy the Black Panther Party, which FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover privately called the greatest threat to the internal security in the country. Where have you heard that before? That to democracy.
Man.
Right? So here's a video detailing that.
It was uncovered during our trial in the 70s that the COINTELPRO program targeted Black liberation organizations and leaders. And they specifically named targets Dr. King, Stokely Carmichael, Rap Brown, Elijah Muhammad, and pointed to Malcolm X as well. And as the Panthers rose and became powerful, first in Oakland and later in Chicago, as you can see from the clip, what a charismatic young leader at 21 Fred Hampton was. Hoover and his people focused on the Black Panther Party, and specifically in Chicago on Fred Hampton. They had an informant in the Black Panther Party by the name of William O'Neill. He sketched out a floor plan that showed where Hampton would be sleeping. They went to the apartment. They supplied that floor plan to the police. The FBI did. They went to the apartment in the early morning hours, and Fred was asleep. It appeared that he had been drugged by O'Neill or some other agent, and he was murdered in his bed. Over the years, we uncovered documents that showed this floor plan. That was all covered up as well. It showed that the FBI took credit for this raid as part of its COINTELPRO program. And it showed even that O'Neill, after the raid, was given by Hoover and the people in Chicago a $300 bonus, what we later called the 30 pieces of silver for the informant O'Neill for setting up the raid. So he was receiving from Hoover a bonus for the success of the raid. At the same time, he was serving as a pallbearer in Fred Hampton's funeral.
Flint Taylor, you pursued
Wow.
for 30.
So you see, like, now you see why Black people don't trust the police.
Well, no, I get why. I get why. Well, we mentioned COINTELPRO back when we talked about QAnon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I see we're rolling into our final thoughts on this, and you know, this is a good spot for this here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Because a lot of this stuff where we talk about today, let's think about today in light of COINTELPRO, with groups like Patriot Front. There's one that's hanging out in Springfield, Ohio, that showed up they're out of Minnesota, I think, called Blood Tribe. These there's stuff that's more like COINTELPRO with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and different groups like that, where maybe some of these groups started grass in their roots, but have since transitioned to AstroTurf. You, you get what I'm saying though? Like they're Fed boys.
Yep.
They're Fed boys. They're glowies. Whatever you whatever you want to call them. The feds get in there and they start directing things, just like the Gretchen Whitmer plot. You know, that hoax, that entrapment scandal. You know, some of those guys were acquitted, but not before they were run through the ringer.
And some guys pled guilty, which I actually disagree with this. If you plead guilty because you feel like you don't have a way out, that the system is going to come down on you with you don't know what type of evidence they're going to throw against you.
No, you need to, well, to some degree, discovery is a thing. You have to get into a place where you're being defended. Your defense attorneys go to discovery, and then all the evidence is out, and your defense attorney. I think a lot of these guys were faced with, they were just bullied into pleading out for something lesser, so that way they could just get them. They just had to get them. They didn't have to get them on anything substantial. They just had to get them. And if you plead guilty, guess what? They don't have to argue anything in court. That that's the thing. And some of those guys argued in court, and they said, and so in their court case, it came out like 12 of 18 people were all feds or Fed informants of some form, that kind of thing. This is a thing where I have sympathies for the left in there. I have commonality with the left, because I understand now in this day and age where there are groups that will get together and claim to, and they may start out like, we're going to do Second Amendment stuff. We're going to be self-sufficient. We're going to do these things, and we're going to stand up for, constitutional rights today. But then they get infiltrated and they become something they never were. Like Black Panthers started as just a community security kind of thing, right? And then it got changed. There was a point where there was a flip, and it became more militant, and it became more radical and Marxist. Some people would argue that it was from the beginning. But, you had, in those days, you had Black Panthers. It was Black Panthers, Young Lords, and then there was a group of Southern rednecks there in Chicago also that flew a Confederate flag. I forget the name of the Patriot Party, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, that was the original Rainbow Coalition. Yes, there was a bunch of Southern poor white boys in Chicago that flew a Confederate flag because they were poor.
Chicago.
This is South Chicago. If you listen to Tim Pool talk about where he was from, he's from South Chicago, and there's multiracial. There's everybody in that area, and they kind of all collect together. Well, the guys running the Confederate flags eventually get run out, but that was the original Rainbow Coalition. There was actually a true diversity of people who were poor and down and out, and they did not trust their government. And then today, the left is a shell of what it used to be. That sentiment is now being moved forward with a different engine inside of it. It looks and sounds the same, but it is not the same. The kinds of things they get behind today are, they twist the story. They don't stand for justice. They are not calling out the people who need to be called out. And the worst part is when the things that were done to the minority groups in the civil rights era are now being done today to white people or right-wingers or the other from them. When other people are now going through it, the tragedy is that they're not calling it out. Groups like BLM, the radicals, and in that sense, they think it's good. Oh, you're getting yours. Now, I'm getting mine. I didn't go to high school in 1968. I graduated 2005. What do I have to do with the civil rights era and the riots?
It's not progressivism. That's not progressivism. Progressivism is moving forward and leaving those bad things behind, taking the good things and moving forward. Not taking the good things, moving forward for yourself, and taking the bad things and now flipping it on, who you consider your opposition, we shouldn't be called opposition. We should be more called colleagues than anything else that just have a different voice of opinion, which is, I think, the reason why you see a lot of people leaving both the Republican and the Democratic Party and joining in the middle. Because back in, what was it? It was 27% in 2010 of independents versus now it's like 45%. It's because they don't want to deal with that. And even people in the middle are being considered grifters. And it's like, wait, what? like, oh, you've run out of names to call us? Like, like what's going on here? But it's sad to see that, what it has become. And I'm not just going to blame them. I mean, look at the establishment side on the right. Like, they're just giving your rights away for no reason.
Yeah, the sad thing is, and I think a lot of this is changing with Trump in the party at this point, is the Republican side basically gave up on minorities at a certain point because they were so in the bag for Democrats for a long time. And now that side, that community, some of the things you've shown me and turned me on to, and just the stats of the voters that are coming over to Trump, it's phenomenal to see that the Republican Party now is seeing, oh, this community has opened their eyes and they've seen how they've been grifted upon. And now they're seizing upon that because they see the opportunity to be able to say, hey, now there's actually an incentive to go into minority communities and do outreach and those things over the last few years. And I hate to put it in a transactional way. It kind of sounds that way, but honestly, like there is a certain level of being just dejected when it comes to the topic, and so I think if we can get past the transactional phase that it kind of is in, at this point, I think in the long run, it'll forge new relationships and whatnot with people. Like, one of the things that I've found has been cool about you and I getting to know each other is basically we've lived the same lives in two different cultures. Like some of the stuff we did growing up, playing games, playing in bands and music, the way our families are, set up, 2 kids that are the same age. There's so many more things that Roma and I have in common that we make fun of the racist stuff by telling racial jokes. I say racial jokes, not necessarily racist. Racist. But like, if you're ever in a room with us in the Discord or something, or if we happen to be in your town hanging out somewhere, if we travel, we like to do get-togethers, you'll hear us banter, and it's great because we're able to make light of a dark topic and put that stuff behind us. We didn't grow. I know I didn't grow up through the late 90s having any kind of racial animosities with people who didn't look like me. In the last 2 bands I was in the only white guy, so
speck in the crowd.
I stuck out like a light bulb in the dark, bro.
Exactly. Yeah, but yeah, to kind of close this one out, so we look at Breonna Taylor, Fred Hampton, both technically had warrants, both were killed in their home, both alleged that they were no-knock warrants, and then we find out information afterwards about with Breonna Taylor and potential with their drugs and how she lost her job, and then with Fred Hampton 10 years later, that this was actually pretty much a psyop. It was one of the first real psyops.
Yeah.
That was performed.
I'm really glad that you put this together, because I didn't see. I don't know the civil rights movement as well as I probably should. I probably know it better than some.
Racist.
I like my coffee black.
Love it, man.
This was cool. I love to see that the whole history rhymes, and to see how a community can go, yeah, I've seen this before, but not actually being the same thing, and some people not having the sight to cut through the garbage and go, wait, this isn't what happened last time. The players are the same. The story's a little different. You know, that's the thing. So, yeah, this was cool. Chill out. We got to chill this one out. Who we shouting out tonight, Roma?
All right, see. Let's go into the comment section. What do we got?
I got some stuff starred. I'll go over there.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I'll back up on that. Hit some of these comments. It says BLM was Braden says BLM was mad about Micaiah. Not sure of the spelling. Bryant in Cleveland. I thought that was Columbus. I could be wrong. She was actively trying to stab someone. Yeah, I saw that one. one. They were like, oh my god! It's like, dude, she had a knife. She tried to stab that cop. I watched it.
My own eyes.